My parents decided to prioritize my sister's vacation over my wedding and asked me to reschedule. I refused, and now our family is in chaos. I'm 28, a male, working a standard 9-to-5 job, and I live quite independently. I've been with my fiancé, Jordan, for over 4 years, and we've been engaged for about a year now. Finally, we are planning our wedding, something I've been dreaming about for a long time. I've put so much thought into every little detail, and for the last 4 months, I've been working tirelessly to ensure everything is perfect. We sent out the invitations, set the date, and all our loved ones were supposed to be there. Well, that was the plan, anyway. My parents, Mark and Lisa, are an interesting duo. My dad is 58 and works at a construction company. He's always been more of the quiet, go-with-the-flow type. My mom, Lisa, is 55 and has been a stay-at-home mom for as long as I can remember. They've always had a soft spot for my older sister, Clara, who is 32. Actually, soft spot might be an understatement. She's definitely their favorite, the golden child, if you will. Clara is a bit of a character. She's always been ambitious, I'll give her that, but none of her business ventures ever really pan out. She's had multiple failed startups and seems to live in this fantasy world where the next big idea will finally make her rich. She's married to Tom, who is 30, and they have 2 kids, Lily, who's 5, and Max, who's 3. Now, I don't have anything against them personally, but it's no secret that they live way beyond their means. My parents are constantly bailing them out, and it's gotten to the point where it's just expected. Clara and her family basically live off my parents' support, while I've always been the one who's had to fend for himself. When Jordan proposed to me, I couldn't wait to tell my family, even though I knew there'd be some drama, especially where Clara was concerned. But I tried to stay positive. I remember the day we announced our engagement. We had a small get-together at our place, just close family and friends. I was so excited to share the news, and for a brief moment, it felt like maybe my parents would be happy for me and not just focus on Clara. But, of course, Clara and Tom managed to steal the spotlight. Right in the middle of our announcement, Clara starts talking about how she's considering launching a new business and that they're thinking of moving to a bigger house. The whole situation shifted from our engagement to Clara's latest plans. It was frustrating, to say the least, but I didn't want to make a scene. I just swallowed my pride and let it slide. Jordan noticed, though, and later that night, he told me he was proud of how I handled it. That meant a lot to me. Setting the date was another ordeal. We picked a date 4 months out, giving everyone plenty of time to plan. I even checked in with my parents before finalizing it to make sure they didn't have any conflicts. They assured me they'd be there, no problem. I thought that was the end of it, but I should have known better. I went all out on the details. We chose a beautiful venue, picked out flowers, and found the perfect suit. Everything was falling into place, and I was getting more and more excited. This was supposed to be our day, a celebration of our love surrounded by the people who matter most to us. I even included Clara and Tom in the wedding party, hoping it would help smooth over any potential issues. But deep down, I knew there was a storm brewing. That storm hit when my parents called me out of the blue with an urgent request. They needed to talk about the wedding, and it didn't sound good. A few weeks ago, my parents suddenly made plans with Clara and her family to go on a vacation. I was confused at first because I thought they were talking about a trip after the wedding, but no, they meant the same week as my wedding. They wanted to know if I could possibly move the date of my wedding because it conflicted with their vacation plans. I was stunned. I mean, I'd planned this wedding for months, sent out invitations, booked everything, the venue, the caterers, and now they were asking me to change the date as if it was just some casual dinner party. My wedding day, the day that was supposed to be about Jordan and me, was suddenly less important than a last-minute vacation with Clara and her family. I tried to stay calm, but I was furious. I asked them why they would plan a vacation so close to the wedding date we'd already set. My mom's response? Well, you know how busy doubled down. They started calling other family members, trying to paint me as the unreasonable one. They claimed I was refusing to compromise and making things difficult for everyone. They even hinted that I was jealous of Clara and trying to punish her by not moving the wedding date. It was complete nonsense, but some of the family started to take their side, saying that I should be more flexible and considerate of Clara's family. It became clear that they were trying to manipulate me into giving in. They were using guilt and family pressure to try and force me to change the date, but I wasn't going to let them win. I had every right to have my wedding on the date I'd chosen, and I wasn't about to let them ruin it just to cater to Clara. So, I told them that the date was set, and if they couldn't make it, then that was their decision. I wasn't going to change it, and that was final. After posting my story online, I received an overwhelming amount of support and advice, and I'm really grateful to everyone who took the time to respond. Reading through the comments, a lot of people suggested that there might be more to my parents' sudden vacation plans than they were letting on. It got me thinking, so I decided to do some digging. I started by talking to my aunt again, who's always been more like a second mom to me. She knows how my parents are with Clara, so she wasn't surprised by what was happening. But when I mentioned the vacation, she got really quiet. After a moment, she admitted that she'd heard Clara was having some serious financial problems again. Apparently, her latest business venture had flopped, and she was in debt. My parents had been helping her out again, but it wasn't enough. Clara was desperate and looking for a way to keep her head above water. It turns out the vacation was actually a cover story. My parents were planning to take Clara and her family to Europe, but not for a leisurely getaway. They were going to meet with some potential investors Clara had found overseas. The whole trip was a last-ditch effort to get someone to invest in Clara's business before she lost everything. They were banking on this trip to save Clara's financial situation, and that's why they were so insistent on going. I was furious when I found out it wasn't just about the vacation, it was about my parents once again prioritizing Clara over everything else, including my wedding. They were willing to miss my big day to try and bail Clara out of another mess she'd gotten herself into. After learning the truth, I knew I had to confront Clara. I called her up and asked if we could meet. I didn't tell her what it was about because I didn't want to give her time to prepare some excuse. When we met up, I went straight to the point. I told her I knew about the trip, the investors, and her financial troubles. At first, she tried to play it off, saying it was just a business opportunity that happened to coincide with the wedding date, but I wasn't buying it. She got defensive and said I didn't understand how much pressure she was under and how she was doing everything she could to provide for her family. I reminded her that this wasn't the first time she'd gotten herself into a financial hole and that our parents had been bailing her out for years. Clara finally admitted that things were bad, her business was on the brink of bankruptcy, and if this investor deal didn't work out, she'd lose everything. But instead of taking responsibility, she tried to guilt-trip me. She said that as her brother, I should want to help her in any way I could, even if that meant moving my wedding date. She accused me of being selfish and not caring about her family. That was the last straw. I told her that I'd supported her as much as I could over the years, but I wasn't going to sacrifice my wedding day for her poor decisions. I made it clear that I wasn't going to change the date, and if she couldn't be there, that was her choice. I left her sitting there after the confrontation with Clara. I decided to reach out to Tom. I wasn't sure how much he knew about everything, and I wanted to hear his side of the story. We met for coffee, and I could tell he was nervous as soon as we sat down. He probably knew I wasn't there to chat about wedding plans. I asked him straight up how much he knew about Clara's situation and the Europe trip. He admitted that he was aware of the financial issues but didn't know all the details. Clara had kept a lot of it from him to protect him, but he knew things were bad. When I told him about the real reason behind the trip, he looked shocked. He had no idea that my parents were planning to use the trip to try and secure investors for Clara's business. Tom confessed that only get worse. So, I called a family meeting. I told my parents, Clara, and Tom that we needed to talk, no excuses, no postponing. We decided to meet at my parents' house, and Jordan came with me for support. I was glad to have him by my side. My parents were already there, and you could tell they were nervous. Clara and Tom arrived shortly after, with Clara looking defensive from the start. We all sat down in the living room, and I wasted no time. I started by telling them that I knew about Clara's financial troubles and the real reason behind the Europe trip. My parents looked shocked. Clara, on the other hand, tried to act like it wasn't a big deal, but I wasn't having it. I didn't hold back. I laid everything out, the years of favoritism, the endless bailouts, and how this was just the latest example of them prioritizing Clara over me. I told them that I understood they wanted to help Clara, but there had to be a line, and this was it. I explained how much this wedding meant to me, how much work I'd put into planning it, and how devastated I was that they were willing to throw it all away for a trip. Then, I pulled out the evidence I had gathered. I had copies of emails and messages between Clara and my parents discussing the trip, the investors, and how they needed to keep it quiet. I even had a copy of the itinerary showing that the trip was scheduled during my wedding week. My parents looked like they wanted to crawl under the couch, and Clara was furious that I'd gone behind her back to get this information. I didn't care. I wasn't going to let them continue to manipulate me or make me feel guilty for wanting to have my wedding as planned. I also revealed that Tom wasn't fully on board with the trip, which seemed to catch Clara off guard. She turned to him, but he just looked away, confirming what I'd said. Clara started yelling, accusing me of trying to ruin her life and saying that I was just jealous because she was the successful one in the family. My mom started crying, saying that she just wanted to help both of her children and didn't want to have to choose between us. My dad was silent, which honestly made me even angrier. He'd always been the one to stay out of the drama, but this time I needed him to take a stand. Tom finally spoke up and said that he wasn't comfortable with the idea of missing the wedding, especially now that he knew the full story. He said that they needed to find another way to deal with Clara's business problems that didn't involve sacrificing family events. Clara looked like she wanted to argue, but Tom stood his ground. I actually felt a bit of respect for him in that moment. But I wasn't done yet. I told them that they needed to make a decision: either they prioritized this trip and missed my wedding, or they found another way to help Clara that didn't involve abandoning me. I made it clear that I wasn't going to change the date, and if they couldn't accept that, then they were making their choice clear. I gave them 24 hours to decide. I told them that if they didn't choose to come to the wedding, I would cut ties with them. I wasn't going to let them continue to treat me like I didn't matter, and I wasn't going to let them ruin my wedding day. I even hinted that if they forced me to, I'd go public with the whole story. The last thing Clara needed was for her potential investors to find out about her financial mess, and I knew that was my trump card. My parents looked like they'd been hit by a truck, and Clara was angry. Tom just looked sad. I didn't want to do this, but I was tired of being pushed around, tired of always coming second to Clara's needs. I stood up, told them they knew how to reach me, and walked out with Jordan. Since that meeting, things have been hard. I haven't heard from my parents or Clara, and I'm not sure what they're going to decide. So now I'm just waiting to see if my parents will finally put me first or if this is the end of our relationship as I know it. After what felt like an eternity, my parents finally reached out. It was the longest 24 hours of my life, and I couldn't focus on anything else while I waited for their decision. When my phone rang, I had no idea what they were going to say, and part of me didn't want to hear it. My mom started off by apologizing. She said that after our last conversation, they'd done a lot of thinking. They realized how much this wedding meant to me and how unfair they'd been by asking me to move the date. She admitted that they'd been too focused on all the time. It wasn't a complete turnaround, but it was the first time I'd ever heard them acknowledge their favoritism so openly. They promised to work on being more present in my life and on treating both of their children equally. It was a lot to take in, and I wasn't sure how much of it would actually stick, but it was a start. I could tell they were sincere, and it gave me hope that maybe our relationship could improve moving forward. As for Clara, she was still angry, but my parents seemed determined not to let that dictate their actions anymore. They were starting to see that constantly bailing her out wasn't helping anyone, not her, not them, and certainly not our family as a whole. They even hinted that they might start setting some boundaries with her, which was something I never thought I'd hear. Of course, Clara didn't take any of this lying down. When she realized that my parents were serious about canceling the trip and coming to the wedding, she ramped up her efforts to get them back on her side. She started making all sorts of threats, including the possibility of taking legal action against my parents if they didn't follow through with the trip. She claimed they'd promised to help her with her business, and if they didn't, she'd have no choice but to sue them for breach of contract. It was an empty threat, and I think deep down Clara knew it, but it showed just how desperate she was to get their support. My parents didn't back down. They told her that their decision was final and that she needed to figure out her own problems without relying on them so much. This was a huge step for them, and while it was hard for them to stand up to Clara, they knew it was necessary. Clara didn't stop there, though. She started reaching out to other family members, trying to get them on her side. She painted me as the villain, claiming that I manipulated our parents into canceling the trip just to sabotage her. It caused some tension within the extended family, with a few relatives buying into Clara's narrative, but most of them saw through it and supported my parents' decision to prioritize my wedding. Despite her best efforts, Clara's manipulation tactics weren't as effective as they used to be. It seemed like people were finally starting to see her for who she really was, a person who was constantly looking for a handout rather than taking responsibility for her own actions. As a result of all this drama, there was definitely a divide forming within the family. Some of our relatives were firmly on Clara's side, believing that my parents should have kept their promise to help her no matter what. They saw me as the spoiled younger brother who was using his wedding to drive a wedge between the family. But others, especially those who'd seen how Clara's behavior had affected my parents over the years, were supportive of their decision to attend the wedding and start setting boundaries with her. Family gatherings were more tense now, with people quietly taking sides. I could feel the judgment from those who thought I was in the wrong, but I was trying not to let it get to me. Jordan has been great about helping me stay focused on the positives, like the fact that we were still moving forward with our wedding plans and that my parents would be there to support us. It wasn't easy, though. I worried about how this would affect our family in the long run. Would this rift ever heal, or would it continue to grow until it was too wide to bridge? I didn't have the answers, but I knew that I had to stand firm in my decisions. I couldn't keep bending over backward to accommodate everyone else, especially when it meant sacrificing my own happiness. As for Clara, I didn't know what the future held for her. She was still trying to find a way to save her business, but without our parents' financial backing, it was going to be an uphill battle. In the meantime, Jordan and I were focusing on our wedding and the life we were building together. It hadn't been an easy road, but I was hopeful that the changes happening in my family would lead to a healthier, more balanced relationship for all of us in the long run. The day of the wedding finally arrived, and despite all the drama leading up to it, I wanted this day to be perfect. Jordan and I had worked so hard to make it special, and I just wanted everything to go smoothly. My best man, Nick, who'd been my best friend since college, kept reminding me that today was about Jordan and me, and nothing else mattered. We got ready at the venue, a beautiful garden estate that Jordan and I had fallen in love with the moment we saw it. I knew my parents were coming, but I hadn't spoken to Clara since our last conversation. I wasn't sure if she'd show up or not, and the thought of a potential confrontation was weighing on me.